JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley, and today I'm welcoming you all back to Peter Massam's second podcast interview here on Talking Books about his books that make up the trilogy, The Learning Experience. In the last podcast, we talked about the first two books in the series, where we saw George, the main protagonist, facing growing pains around his teenage years in Nipper. And then in Moose Conquering Fear, George overcoming, to the best of his ability, everybody, relationships, particularly adult relationships. And, oh, they can be tricky, can't they, everybody? That mainly focuses on the interactions with the opposite sex. And yes, they can be tricky as well. But this book, the third and last book in the trilogy, isn't so much about continuation of George's struggles, issues in everyday life, but more about exploring the unique relationship between the mind and the body so as to help and support people going through, facing the teenage growing pains and coping with adult relationships, which some sail through unscathed, but most of us don't. For us, it's like one forward and two back, especially we blokes. So let's invite Peter back to talk about what's hiding in the pages of this third book of his, Know Your Mind. Peter, welcome back.
Thank you, John, and good evening.
Good evening. And for those of us, we have a little joke today between the two of us, because this is the third attempt today, everybody. We started in the morning and now we've ended up doing it in the evening. We're not going there.
Let's hope we get there this time.
Technology is wonderful. Not. Anyway, let's have a look at this book. Peter, when I looked at this book, I thought the best way to approach the subject matter here was for us to concentrate more on the idealistic ethos of the book, the spirit, the heart of the book, the message you're conveying here. Yes, we'll have a look at some of the chapters as we go along. But firstly, Peter, I want to dig around your thinkings around the preface and introduction to this book, because to me, these sections lay bare the concept of the whole trilogy. Let's start with the preface. Now, you refer to the book Nipper as more as a coming-of-age drama, with Moose Conquering Fear more factual about specific events that shape a person's life, like George's, and that the third volume is kind of pulling everybody, all the threads together to really tie this trilogy down. So, Peter, talk to us through the preface and the significance of what you're revealing here and why you put it there.
I felt that it needed, there are prefaces to the other two books too, but I felt particularly in this one that, hold on one second. I felt particularly in this one that it needed to contextualize what the final book is about, which is based on the experiences of the first two books. In particular, the second book, in terms of the fears that can be overcome by using your mind in a more proactive way than is normal. We tend to believe that the mind is, yes, we know it's there. We know we make decisions every day. But from the experiences that George encounters, it adds up to a lot more in terms of capabilities. And what the preface does is it sets the context for the last book as being slightly more academic, I suppose, in a way, because it proposes a philosophy based on the amalgamated experiences of George as he goes through his later life. And in order to set the context of where I wanted to take this, a lot of wider reading of the bigger picture of the evolution of the mind that had been experienced by George needed to be set. And for that, I drew on some very expert advice from the past, including Bertrand Russell, David Attenborough, Harari on mankind, and Hawking in his Brief History of Time. Because the wider picture really is how we as humans have evolved and where this possibly could have come from, and what evidence there is that there have been changes through the years which have culminated in this experience in a single individual, but which is demonstrably shared by other capabilities shown by other people in the third book.
Ah. Yeah, let's still stay within the confines of the preface, Peter. You say it would be all too convenient to classify this work as one of psychology, whereas in fact it considers occurrences. How do you substantiate this thought process as if we went to, say, a chapter like The Agony and the Ecstasy in part 1 of the book, physical well-being? Would I and the listeners see evidence of your considered occurrences here?
You would certainly see how the mind can ease pain and help in those situations where one would normally be quite fearful of what was about to happen. So with The Agony and the Ecstasy, as you know, is based around both laughable situations in the dental surgery, as well as rather more serious attention to a root canal filling, or 2 root canal fillings as it happened. But the psychology part, Russell puts it very well in that philosophers down the centuries have always gone into the unknown spaces. And once there is evidence provided to those spaces, they become sciences. And psychology was one of those. And the reason I say this is a new philosophical perspective in book 3. And the second book is more of a psychology category, because it looks at how George reacts to certain situations with the background of his mind is making those decisions, but he's also amassing knowledge of how the mind could possibly help.
Let's still stick with this chapter. And I've done this for a reason, everybody, because why did you choose the storyline here, around the dental trips? We can all relate to these issues here. Was this you recalling such an event from your own life here?
Yes, there are strong autobiographical links in George's encounters and my own, of course. And I suppose the reason, as you say, for doing it is that people can relate to it. It's a normal activity, just like another chapter relates to a business scenario of somebody who's in a business career. So it's relatable to everybody, and it's also a means of showing how those fears can be overcome with the capacity that the mind has to be able to numb certain part or any part of your body, and it proved very beneficial in the case of the root canal, which went not according to plan.
When I had my root canal done, Peter, the dentist said to me, "Would you like to be to watch?" I said, "You must be joking." I said, "You're knocking me out."
I certainly had the similar feeling when somebody said they wanted to take wisdom teeth out, and they said, "Well, we'd prefer, you can stay awake for this if you like, and we could just take one or two out, but the alternative option was to take all four out under general anaesthetic." And
I wonder what option you chose.
I didn't need to be convinced of that one.
No, I don't blame you. Yeah, knock me out, please. Let's dissect, Peter, what you're talking about in the introduction. Why did you set it out in this fashion? That's what I'm trying to get at. I was particularly drawn to paragraph 3, what began as a collection of thoughts amassed from strangely inexplicable recurrences, leading to wider possibilities of the power of the mind. That's what you said there. Enlighten us here, Peter, as to why you've said that, what's going on here, and how it relates to chapters in the book like the agony and the ecstasy, and say, for example, 2 other chapters, Miles Away and Evolutionary Tale.
Well, they share one thing in common, I suppose, which is, for the most part, they were all repeatable experiences. So one thing that George came across very soon after encountering the first one or two situations was the dependability of the outcome. So yes, not just one dental appointment, but of course the ones that followed were all much happier incidents because of the control that he felt he now had over the experience. And it is similar with Miles Away. In the yes, you probably wouldn't have come across more than once the person that he encountered in London, but certainly when he went out to China, the first hint, if you like, of the possibilities of communicating with each other just through thinking or by using the mind was first revealed to him. And skeptic as he is, he would always try and prove it again to make sure that this wasn't some kind of coincidence or just sheer luck. And it's that the other occurrences share with each other, is that these things have never stopped since they were experienced first. They are repeatable.
Because it's all about power of the mind, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
See, when I look at the chapter, say Miles Away, you've already touched on that, and an Evolutionary Tale, I'm intrigued as to why the storylines you chose to put here. In An Evolutionary Tale, you start off by talking about our ancestors coming from the sea, and I thought, and their transition journey to the modern world of today. And in Miles Away, you're talking about how large institutions, organizations can transform themselves to create better experiences for employees and customers. So the subject matters are very different. But yet I think you're going to answer this by saying there is an underlying message here. But I want you to tell everybody.
I think one of the underlying messages is that this applies to everyone in any situation. It doesn't matter what career path you've chosen or what kind of life you lead. The capabilities are and have always been there. It's just that they're extremely underused and undiscovered for a large part. But in certain individuals, when you start encountering those individuals and talking with them, you realize that there are some fairly, how would you describe them? they have a different perspective on life, but they also have certain either sensory capabilities or ability to see things in a different way. One of those occurrences was with a lady that was met by George on a very mundane occasion of returning a lease car, and it turned out that she could well have diagnosed an illness with George's dog, and she confessed at the time that she felt she had this ability, but she was able to talk about it because I had that conversation with a similar person who was comfortable in discussing those things. And I think one of the problems with talking about some of these things to do with the metaphysical and the mind is that people are reluctant to talk because they want to know that you are open to those kind of suggestions. And so long as you have that openness, then people will talk to you about their sensory perception. And one example I quote in the book is a very recent one, which I think I mentioned to you previously, about a lady who could smell Parkinson's and has been able to smell it for some years. And indeed, first diagnosed her husband as having Parkinson's, having walked into a clinic where all the patients had Parkinson's, and she went home and told her husband that she smelled like the other patients, that he smelled like them. And that got him into to see a GP, and it went from there. And sure enough, he did have that. And now she is working with the scientific community because they believe her, whereas before they didn't. And they have analysed the specific smells that are promoting that response in her, which is great.
It is, because I mean, there's nothing like the sixth sense.
Yes.
It's there, isn't it? A sixth sense.
I think we all. I mean, we talk about it quite a lot. Yeah. Some more excitedly than others, perhaps. But when there's a period of reflection in anybody's life, and it doesn't matter whether it's a religious belief or whatever, it usually entails shutting down from the outside world, even for the briefest of moments. And it may involve closing your eyes, or it may not. But whether you're a sort of guru in India or just somebody who wants to have time on their own, when you shut out all that noise, that's when you can be alone with your thoughts. And we have these phrases, of course, throughout the language. And it's at that point, when you shut that noise out, that you can, and I don't mean by putting headphones on, that you can relate, if you like, to that sixth sense. And
absolutely.
Just while we're on language, John, there's one other thing I wanted to mention, which is about the evolutionary tale, is that famously in a film 1 million years BC, there were lots of people going around grunting and groaning, making noises that they thought probably prehistoric people might have made. But I don't doubt there is no evidence whatsoever that ever occurred. However, you could say, and I do believe that, because I'm a linguist myself, that there must have been a time when language wasn't around and you were reliant on gestures, as suggested by Attenborough in Life on Earth. And he mentions, for example, pointing. It's something that babies automatically do. And I remember when I was first in France and had no real decent French to use, because I'd studied it for 7 or 8 years and got nothing to show for it. That's what you end up doing, to feed yourself. You point at things. You say, yes, I'll have that, please, in your best but poor French. So it's something that sticks with you, and it's common, as Attenborough pointed out, across many peoples, but peoples that hadn't come into contact with any other civilization that he had met during his career. So it occurred to me that there might have been a time, a long time ago, millions and millions of years ago, when language didn't exist, that there might have been this other means of communicating between people's minds, as well as using gestures.
Yeah, and I think you could probably say twins, particularly identical twins, they can almost read their own, their other twin's mind. They know what the other twin's thinking of.
Yes.
That's a powerful scenario for you there.
It is a good thought, yeah. John, because there are so many studies of twins out there.
Yes.
For that very reason. And I would not suggest, because I would say that for sure there is that, and even some married couples would say that about themselves. The one always finishes the other one's sentence, or
yes,
they know what the other one's about to say before they've said it. That is, in my experience, that is very real, very possible.
Oh, absolutely. I can't think. And I think one of the most famous people in the world who had Parkinson's, just touching on that one again, was Pope John Paul II.
Yes.
And he carried on about his duties.
Yes.
Because I think you want this book to be you want people from the scientific community to read this book, don't you?
Yes, I want as many people to read it, but the scientific community I'm looking to engage,
yeah.
In a realistic way to prove or disprove the findings from those experiences.
For me, Peter, the conclusion you've written at the end of the book is very fundamental. It's a key part not only of this book but of the entire series. If I may read the first few paragraphs of the conclusion, and then I'm going to ask you why you put it in there. So You've got the conclusion here, and you say, as with any business discussion, the last item will always be the next steps to validate an idea or advance a theory. In formulating those, I would return to Hawking, 2011, page 209, who lamented the demise of the philosopher's role. And it's got in here, the 18th century philosophers considered the whole of human knowledge, including science, to be their field, and discussed questions such as, did the universe have a beginning? The multi-dollar question, that one is, everybody. I would like to restore the balance somewhat after a lull of 3 centuries later to encourage cooperation and collaboration with the scientific community and quantum theorists to take account of all aspects of the universe and what it means to be human. Why have you put that in, the opening gamut of your conclusion? Tell us.
I suppose it's to attract the attention of the scientific community who are involved in astrophysics, astronomy, perhaps, as well as the physical sciences, physics. And it's really to take a step back to what Hawking was lamenting, which was, instead of relying on observation first, which has been the modus operandi of philosophers and scientists for very many decades, they have turned it on its head. So they have an idea, a theory, which they think explains a certain condition of the universe, or it might be some microscopic or nanoscopic detail, and then build the mathematical calculations around it, and then see if they can see that happening in the universe. And that's really turning things right the way around to where they came from.
Interesting viewpoint.
And in so doing, one of the crucial parts for me in his brief history of time was again lamenting the fact that the equipment necessary to do the kind of science that's being done today is only open to a very select few scientists because it's so expensive. And that limits the scope of the proposals going forward. And for me, this, personally, I would love to work with those kind of institutions to quantify, to provide quantifiable evidence, which can be, and as I say, the science behind. There is a chapter called "The Science," which goes into very current science on quantum physics, and suggests that there are certain things which, if we're combined together, or if a different perspective was thrown on those, that could be used to prove that these things are possible. But it would have to disrupt one or two of their current theories. And I suppose I'm I'm in a slightly I don't know whether you describe it as an advantageous position or whether you think I might be bipolar or something, but my education consists of both arts and sciences at degree level. And for many years at the end of my career, I thought, well, that actually perfectly describes me. Whereas if I went back to my school days, we had a survey at the end of our sixth form saying, what career are you cut out for? And it came back with science for me. And there was nothing I hated more than science at that time. so much for your survey.
Well,
I think you got it completely wrong. But then, 20 years later, 25 years later, hey presto, things have changed.
So, I mean, Peter, do you think that readers, once you've read your book and they've read the conclusion and they've read all the trilogy, that they'll see a strong evidence of your thought process here? And I'm going to be quite cheeky here. I think that the character George has got an awful lot of your own characteristics in. Am I right?
Yes, I think you would. Yes, you wouldn't have to play the roulette wheel to necessarily come to that conclusion. But yes, there's a lot of autobiographical recollection in there because, and the reason for that, of course, is that it's reliant on an individual's experience, and the one that you best know is your own. But you also have the interaction with other people who relate their experiences to you as well. And that is why those things are incorporated in the book too, to show how broad this can be in the, it's not just because we tend to, those ones, the lady I talked about with sensory perception of smell, when you see that in the news, you tend to think, oh, she's very special and she's very gifted, rather like an athlete or a scientist that wins the Nobel Prize. But actually, these capabilities belong to all of us. We all have that possible, it's just that some will have genes which came from millions of years ago, perhaps, is what I'm suggesting.
Would you also include in that, I've just thought of this, these people that the police use, psychologists, to profile a criminal so that they can come up with, how does this criminal's mind, work? I think you could, couldn't you?
Yes, I think that. I think you're right, John, but I also think that even going further than that is, I'm sure a lot of policemen and detectives, I've had some friends who were detective chief superintendents, they have some of them will have a foreboding as they approach property. They will know that something isn't right.
An innate sixth sense.
An innate, yes, and it, that will be backed up by evidence. With their eyes, they will see that, a window is open or the door is, not the obvious things, but they will just have that, yes, as you say, innate sense that something isn't quite right here, and therefore they'll be cautious about their approach.
And finally, Peter, the epilogue in the book, your stay in Melbourne, Australia. What was going on there?
Yes, you might feel as I've jumped around a bit.
He has jumped around a bit, everybody.
But I haven't done any other epilogue because this is the end of the trilogy. And what I wanted to do, so I laid out the next steps in terms of the conclusion, but then I wanted to give the reader something that they could latch onto. I think what you said before, when they put the book down after they've read the last word, what is it you want people to take away? And the epilogue gives that to them, which is the J turn, or the hook turn, as some in America might call it, where you come up to a crossroads, and ostensibly, because the tram lines are in the crossroads as well, they take the traffic off to the left. They filter it off to the left before it turns right. That happens on some of the French departemental roads as well. But the thing I picked up from that was not the traffic direction or how they can manage their traffic. It was more the effect that had on the traffic slowing down to be in pace with pedestrians as they were walking up the hill. And that made a big impression on me because they just seemed to be completely in sync with one another. That they were as if those people were not actually driving a car; they just happened to be part of a human race going up the hill.
Did you enjoy writing this book, this trilogy?
Yes, I couldn't wait to. I think I started the first one in July last year, and this one I ended in published in February the 8th. Yeah. And I couldn't wait to get it all out.
So, who would you like to see reading your books? Young, old, middle age? Who?
Well, age is not a consideration. You'll be pleased to hear.
Works for both there.
I don't exactly. I don't write to that sort of age group. But the first one was written in a simpler language to begin with, which I think you picked up on actually in the last podcast. As you get towards the end of the book, the maturity of the conversation changes.
It does,
and that meant that, first of all, my first desire actually goes back to an introduction to a poetry book I wrote not too long ago, which was that, it was in the introduction to the first one, Nipper. I was put off reading early on by being given A Tale of Two Cities by my well-meaning grandma, and unfortunately I never got past page 2, and I think I was aged 8 or so. It was completely the wrong book to give to a child of that age. So I made the beginning of the book Nipper accessible to younger teenagers. So the 12s, 13s, 14s, they should feel that they can pick it up and relate with what's going on there. And then as they progress through their teenage years, they'll see that the maturity of not just the encounters, but the language that's used, and how you can feel disassociated from both your parents and other people around you who suddenly become, for some reason, they become very much older. Or the people, when you're 19 or so, you see people of 17 or 18 coming out of school at university, and they just seem so young because if they haven't had any working life at all, you think their perspective, you've left that behind, so you've got to wait for them to catch up, kind of thing.
Yeah. And of course, we have to emphasize here is that to understand the trilogy, you really do need to read the first book, then the second, then you'll understand the third, everybody. It doesn't work vice versa, believe you me. Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure having you back on the show.
Thank you very much.
It just leaves me to say, everybody, I'm JT Crowley. Thanks for listening, watching, wherever you're in the world. Stay safe.